Hello, welcome back. Today we're going to take a look at the trace minerals. The trace minerals include iron, zinc, iodine, selenium, copper, manganese, chromium, fluoride, and molybdenum. We're just going to really focus on the ones that are important for athletes. Some of these trace minerals are not super important for athletes, and most athletes will get enough of them in the foods that they eat. Okay, so what are trace minerals? Trace minerals are found in foods. The content of these minerals in foods varies with the soil and water composition from the location in which that food was grown. Deficiencies and inadequacies can affect people of all ages, typically worse in children and adolescents. They can also be bad in masters athletes, but inadequacies can often be difficult to recognize and will typically result in a slow decline in performance. Unfortunately, the FDA does not regulate trace minerals in supplements, so I would be very cautious using trace mineral supplements as part of your training regimen. First off, let's start with iron. Iron is absolutely crucial for athletes, and iron is often short in many athletes. You can find iron in all kinds of different foods, things like meats and liver, some of the highest sources of iron, but you can also find it in leafy greens. Parsley is an excellent source of iron, broccoli, and a variety of nuts and seeds and fruits. Either too little or too much iron is harmful, though typically in athletes we see too little iron as being the common problem. There are a couple of different types of iron, ferrous iron and ferric iron. Absorption of iron can be promoted by using foods high in vitamin C. Iron is essential for metabolism because it's found at the core of electron-carrying proteins for all of the metabolic processes. There's carbohydrate and fat metabolism. Iron is absolutely essential for the oxygen carriers hemoglobin in the blood and myoglobin in the muscles. So you absolutely must have high iron levels to be able to support maximum oxygen delivery for your sport. As I said, low iron is a very common problem in athletes. The recommended dietary allowance in adults is about 800 milligrams per day. That may be insufficient for many athletes. The upper limit is around 45 milligrams per day, and worldwide it is a very common deficiency. Women in their reproductive years are particularly vulnerable to low iron levels, again, especially athletes. During pregnancy, especially in athletes, iron levels can be very low. Young athletes, children and adolescents can have low iron levels. Anyone that is a cancer patient or a frequent blood donor can have low iron levels. And as I said, athletes often lose iron through sweat losses and through micro impacts, resulting in low iron levels and anemia and loss of performance. Even small blood losses over long periods of time, can cause deficiency. Deficiency will develop in stages. The first is diminished iron stores, which will show up as low ferritin. After that, you can see decreases in the amount of iron in the transport protein transferrin, so low iron transferrin. And lastly, it will show up as a decrease in hemoglobin or hematocrit as the levels of red blood cells decline because iron is low in transferrin and low in ferritin. You want to be sure to make sure that your iron levels are high enough to prevent loss of hemoglobin, and so keep your ferritin and transferrin levels high. Anemia is the disease that is caused by depletion of iron stores, results in this low hemoglobin, and you will see with anemia poor exercise performance, poor work performance, sometimes loss of temperature regulation, and an inability to focus and concentrate. Basically, a huge loss in sports performance. And unfortunately, this is quite a common deficiency. There are some things that will inhibit the absorption of iron. So if you're eating a high iron food, you do not want to combine that food with nuts containing phytic acid. You would not want to combine that food with raw eggs. Raw eggs contain a protein called phosphovitin that will prevent iron absorption from the foods that you're eating. Taking supplements like calcium, zinc, magnesium, they can compete with iron uptake. Oxalates found in spinach, rhubarb, and beetroot will inhibit iron uptake, and so you shouldn't take anything like beetroot or beetroot juice at the same time as you're taking in your iron containing foods. And sometimes and polyphenols, especially things like tannins, coffee, cocoa, can inhibit iron uptake. On the plus side, dark chocolate contains a lot of iron, and that's a pretty good choice for athletes. There are heme iron and non-heme iron. Heme iron is found in meat products. Non-heme iron is found in vegetable products. Heme iron is well absorbed. About 25% of it is absorbed, whereas non-heme iron, only about 17% of it is absorbed. For this reason, if you are a vegetarian or vegan, you need to really double your the dietary allowance to be able to absorb sufficient iron from your non-heme sources. Next up, I want to talk to you about zinc. Zinc is very important for a number of different antioxidant enzymes, and it's especially important for immune system function. Colds and flus, upper respiratory tract infections are common amongst athletes, particularly during the competition phase. So you want to make sure that your zinc levels are adequate to support your immune system and prevent upper respiratory tract infections. Zinc is essential also for thyroid function and for regulating your basal metabolic rate. And there is some evidence that zinc gluconate can shorten the duration of the common cold, that would be rhinovirus infections. Next up, iodine. Iodine can be found in a variety of seafood products. Iodine is converted into iodide, which is readily absorbed by the body. It's essential for thyroid hormone function, and thyroid hormones regulate your body temperature, your metabolic rate, blood cell production, and nerve and muscle function. For this reason, it's essential to get plenty of iodine in your diet. One of the simplest ways of doing that is to use an iodized salt. Chromium. Chromium is an interesting factor, an interesting trace mineral that can be found in a variety of different foods like eggs and cheese and oatmeal and chicken and so forth. Chromium participates in carbohydrate and lipid metabolism. It is essential to maintain glucose levels and for glucose homeostasis. If you lack chromium, it can sometimes show up as a diabetes-like condition. It is not recommended to supplement, however, with chromium because there is no upper limit established, and we really don't know what levels might be toxic for this particular chemical. And athletes should also be aware that heavy metals will harm performance. So athletes want to avoid foods that might be high in heavy metals or sources of heavy metals, things like lead, cadmium, mercury, and arsenic. Some of these will show up in foods, particularly fish from high in the food chain, things like tuna or shark. You can also be exposed to heavy metals in lead paint. There are some leaded gasolines in some countries, not the United States. And lead will displace minerals like calcium, magnesium, iron, and some of the other trace minerals. And because of that, it is very poisonous. Children with iron deficiency are particularly vulnerable to contamination with heavy metals, and heavy metals are typically produced in mining operations. Mercury is from mining runoff, and cadmium can be from mining runoff. It runs off into the ocean, it concentrates up the food chain in the fish, so the fish at the top of the food chain are the ones that you should eat no more than once a week.